School-based adult support determinations with Jenks Public Schools, April 17th, 2024. CERC's Wisdom Wednesday webinar series.
Hi, I'm Allison Conch. I am the program manager for CERC, and we are excited for you all to join us today for the Wisdom Wednesday. We have three presenters from Jenks Public Schools here today. Dr. Jennifer Baker, who is their Director of Student Programs, and Hayden Halbrick and Andrea King, who are the two district special education coordinators. We are so grateful that they're willing to share this helpful rubric they have and guidance document in making adult support determinations for students in their district. So whenever you guys are ready, go ahead and take it away. Oh, Jennifer, you're muted.
Yep, got it. Okay, we're ready, Hayden. You can switch slides. Okay, as Allison said, I'm Jennifer Baker. I'm the Director of Student Programs at Jenks. This is actually my first year as the director. I have spent 19 years at an elementary school as the first and second grade principal, which I spent a lot of time in SPED meetings and working with my SPED teachers and using this para-rubric that we're going to be talking about today. Hayden also this is his first year also. He worked at the Freshman Academy as a SPED teacher and a coordinator. And Andrea King was a speech pathologist at the elementary, and she's been a coordinator for 2 years. And all of us have worked closely with all the teachers with doing this para-rubric. So hopefully we'll be able to give you a lot of useful information. And we'll also put in the comments, a copy of one that's that's not completed. So you can use it however you would like. So you could change it. You could use it exactly how it is, take it and take it back to your team. So I hope this presentation is going to be very helpful for all of you guys. Okay, our agenda for today. These are the topics that we're going to be going over: roles, the para roles at Jenks, history and purpose of a para rubric, domains of the para rubric, scoring, when to use the para rubric, how and where to document para support, and reducing para support over time. So I know at different districts, para professionals are defined differently. At Jenks, they are working with our special education students. So they're their tier 2 paras, which have to get through the State Department, have to do modules 1 through 8. So I know some call their paraprofessionals, they could be TAs or could be working with early childhood, but this is specifically, we're talking about special education. So the process we are referring to today I'm going to start over, sorry. Paraprofessionals provide instructional behavior, medical, and other support to students in and outside of the classroom. So exactly what I said with working with our special education students. They could be 1-on-1, they could be 1-3, they could be 1-2, just depending on what the team decides during those meetings. The activities a paraprofessional can assist with could be monitoring behavior, helping academically with just accommodations or modifications. They could be traveling with them for transitions. They could be going into specials with them, lunch, recess. It's the full gamut. It just depends on what that student needs. But of course, our goal is to make them more independent. So the goal is to gradually take that para support away as soon as we can. So when to use a para rubric. So anytime that we have a student that we are considering a para, we go through that rubric. So it could be the teacher, the classroom teacher, or the special education teacher feels that they would need that support, or it could even be a parent. So the teacher may not think that they need it, but the parent is saying, yes, they need that. And we can go through that rubric and we do it as a team. So included in that team is the parent. So it's not just the school that is making that decision. We ask our staff to do it annually. So we want it up to date because things could change. I mean, we could start the year off where we think, yes, they need this para, and we go through the rubric and they definitely need it. And then towards the end of the year, we're like, not too sure. So then we complete another rubric to decide if we need to either take the para completely away or maybe not use the para as much. So we're gradually taking that support away so they are in their least restrictive environment. We also use it for, look at it to decide on staffing for the next year. So at the district level, we'll look at that to decide how many pairs maybe we need at West Elementary, one of our elementary sites, or maybe Freshman Academy. So we do go back and check to make sure those are updated. So it'll help us guide us on staffing, which the district who makes those decisions on how many pairs we need, it's very helpful for them because they have data. They really like to see that data, not just how we feel.
Jennifer,
Yes, ma'am.
when you guys update these, are they at the end of the school year, or is it just at each student's annual IEP? When you say update annually, is it through their annual IEP if they have had or do have a para on their IEP?
Yes, and then I did come across at the end of the year that they weren't updated, and we went back and asked them to do that. So it's gradually throughout the year. So
Okay.
it could be at their annual IEP meeting, or it could be if you're trying to see if that's truly what they need anymore. You're like, I'm not too sure. Or maybe the parent's like, I don't want them to have an adult with them. I don't want them to have a paraprofessional. So then we'll get out a rubric and complete a new one. And then you can compare what they did previously to what is happening right now. So that helps make any kind of decision throughout the year. So it can be done at any time. It's not specifically just at the annual.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, the history. So why Jinx started using this para rubric. So prior to using this rubric, it was just what we felt. So it could be a parent asks all the time, they're being pushy, like, I think they need this. And the school's like, well, I'm not too sure, but okay, we'll give it to you. Or the teacher is like, I think they do, but I'm not positive. So you don't have anything to guide. So I think a rubric is perfect just to guide the decision on what's best for that student. So in 2019, there was a committee that was formed, and they were looking at this data for reporting purposes, like I said earlier, to HR, to our cabinet, to decide what kind of support that each site needed for the students. And so they really want numbers, they want data. So in order to do that, we needed some kind of guidance for the school sites. So the group consisted of site sped coordinators that were already on, they were all on the committee. They were trying to determine individual areas and levels of necessary pair support for the students. So they were thinking, what areas should we what areas should the committee consider? How's the teacher of record to document the needs of students in various lab settings? So we have our lab, we have our essentials, and then we have our concepts, which our concepts are our severe and profound. Where should it be documented for the pair support? So where does the teacher of record document that? And how does the district ensure that the pair support is communicated with the next receiving site? And that's very important on those transition years. So we have elementary, intermediate, middle school, freshman academy, and high school. So when our kids are in 4th grade, when they head over to 5th, they're transitioning over to the intermediate. So how is that information transferring over to them? Same thing for middle school going to freshman academy. So what we're able to upload this information into EdPlan, everyone has access to it.
So Jennifer, these are really the components of the documentation part, and all of that is really the internal procedures to make sure within the district itself, not necessarily to meet some outside like State Department directive or whatever. It's just to make sure that there's smooth transitioning, and that you guys know as leadership and the teachers in the district, correct me if I'm wrong here, know where to look right away on an IEP to know if a student has a pair support, and what that looks like is if it's consistently documented in that same area when you guys are moving teams, right?
You're exactly right. And also, I think it's good documentation if we get questioned, not necessarily from the State Department, but if there's a parent that goes to CERC, and wants a facilitator, or you go through due process, any of those things that come up, you have this documentation to show how you came up with that decision. It's not just a willy-nilly decision. We actually took the time to document it and make a team decision on that. And so I think this is just further documentation to support the decisions that are being made.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I know with Jinx, when you compared Jinx to some other schools that might be the same size districts, some other districts that might be the same size might have more school sites that are more neighborhood schools. So maybe they're in the same building for like 5 years or longer.
Right.
Whereas Jinx, I know there's transitions even within certain elementary sites from building to building. So a student might transition every 2 years in their career. So making sure that new team knows where to look, knows what to do. I'm sure that that's helpful for within the district too.
No, you're right. Our school definitely is not a neighborhood school. So one building, like at East Elementary, for example, one building is the size of a neighborhood school. So it's like several neighborhood schools which within one campus. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, carrying that information over to the next building is just as important as it is going from one site to the next site. So yes, you're exactly right. Okay, I think this is Hayden.
All right, so welcome everybody. I hope everybody's having a good afternoon. My name is Hayden Halbrook. So I'm going to go over the 5 domains and what the you can see should be the download of the paraprofessional rubric that is not filled out. And we have these 5 domains, and they run vertically on the handout. And so what we try to do is we'll go through each one of these domains and we will complete that. Now this can be completed. You know, a team could have a staffing, say at the beginning of the year. If they have a student with para support, they can just get together and have a staffing. That would be without the parents, and just get an idea of where they feel like that student is. Usually you don't see that until probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks into the school year, because they like to get to know the student and see kind of where they're at and how the para support is working out. And then the other way Dr. Baker already talked about was at the annual IEP, so that we can look over the para support and see how each one of these domains is working for that student. And so the 5 domains are health and personal care, behavior, instruction, inclusion, independence, and social functioning, and then prompting. And then I'm going to go through all these. And again, think of this as it's going to go down. It's going to be vertical. So you'll have several pages. But as we go through this, you know, we basically we talk about it. We talk about it either with the team, and then obviously if the parents are in that IEP meeting, we will talk about it with them, and we will try to come to an agreement on what we feel is appropriate for this student. Now, I'm not going to read through all of these, every single one. I'll try and hit kind of the highlights on these just to give you an idea. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to write them in the chat, and I can try and address those. So on this first one, health and personal care, you know, 0, this would be kind of the lowest need as far as health and personal care. So the student has general good health, no specialized health care or procedure, medication, so on and so forth. Independently, they maintain all age-appropriate personal care. So that might be possibly, you know, gen ed student, lab student. It could be any student across any setting in the SPED school day, excuse me. Then number 1 here is mild or occasional health concerns, allergies, chronic health conditions, no specialized health care service. They might need medication. So this could be possibly an ADHD student. They may need reminders to complete age-appropriate personal care activities. And then the second level here is that chronic health issues. So specialized physical health care services, and EpiPen, inhaler, you know, possibly diabetic students. It could also mean diet or healthcare interventions as far as medication, reminders and prompts, limited hands-on assistance for hand washing, toileting, dressing, those needs. And then the level this 4th level here, where they get a score 3, this is where we're starting to see a little bit more need for health and personal care, that daily specialized physical health care services, so possibly blood sugar, insulin, G-tube. They have limited mobility, physical limitations requiring assistance, possibly a walker or wheelchair, special food prep, frequent physical prompts and assistance for personal care, and then they require training, direct help, and you know, frequent assistance. And then this last one here is the most severe, specialized healthcare services, medications with possibly take longer time to provide, bracing or positioning, direct assistance with personal care, possibly a 2-person lift, and oftentimes might be direct 1-to-1 assistance. And so what we would do here is we would try and address which one applies to the student and which one the team feels is most appropriate. And then behavior, it's pretty much the same thing. Obviously, we just have some different descriptors here.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, about the helping personal care. When you're looking at that category, it's really about the level, just to make sure I'm understanding and that others are too, the level at which an additional adult would need to support those things, whether it be the para being trained on and being able to use like assistive devices, like a gait trainer walker, which would require an additional adult to do those things. Or if they require frequent nurse visits, frequently, if that's the case, if there are significant medical issues, they would need at least someone walking them to the nurse, that type of thing. So like when you guys are looking through this, those things are in place because each of those things may need that extra adult. Although what the adult is doing might look different, whether for, walking them to the nurse versus helping with toileting versus being trained by the PT on assistive stuff, it still requires that level of adult support. That's what this boiled down to, right? In terms
Essentially, yes, absolutely. And, in certain situations, this could also be the special education teacher, especially if we're talking about these last two options here as far as para support. Oftentimes it is the para or assisting them, getting them over to the nurse, possibly getting training from the nurse. So, it's a variety of adult support, but we're trying to essentially assess what level of adult support beyond the SPED teacher this student is going to need.
Okay.
Specifically for this health and personal care.
Okay, thank you.
At least in this domain. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
All right, brilliant. So behavior, again, we have kind of this same template in place. So 0, follow classroom rules. Basically, they're doing what they should be doing in class on a daily basis. Number 1 would be they might have some mild or occasional problems, may require additional encouragement, some prompts. We might see number 1 quite a bit across the school day. Number 2 is where we start to see a little bit more kind of elevated behavior, difficulty following rules and directions, behaving appropriately, specific visually defined rules, a positive reinforcement system, a behavior intervention plan. So this is where we're getting a little bit more detailed in what this student needs and why they might need a para based off of behavior or for behavior reasons. And then, of course, not meeting goals or objectives for verbal and physical aggression, harm towards self or others, sensory needs. They might require direct supervision outside of the classroom. They might have that BIP in place and regular implementation. Data collection on targeted behaviors. This is another one that we're having to do a lot, and we see more common with a student who's having behaviors. We have to have that data collection pretty much on a daily basis so that we have that data going into these meetings that might be a little bit more difficult with a student that is demonstrating this type of behavior. And then, of course, the most serious criteria would be the serious behavior problems despite the implementation of a behavior plan, verbal and physical aggression towards self or others, destroying property, has injured themselves or others. They require that direct supervision to keep not only themselves safe, but students and staff safe. And then typically CPI trained staff, or in our case, it would be mindset trained staff to work with those students when needed. So the next domain is instruction, mostly academic here. 0, again, participates fully in the whole class instruction. For the most part, they're doing okay. They can follow those academic directions. They complete assignments with minimal to no assistance. And then the next level, they participate. Go ahead.
Sorry. I'm just thinking in terms of, for this one, is that at their level? So like for a student, does this mean like they would only get a 0 if the student is in general education all day? Or is that based upon like at their level? They can do these things in the setting that's appropriate for them? Or
I would argue it's based on their appropriate LRE.
Okay. So if it's a student that might be in, say, a concepts or a self-contained class, but they're able to focus and participate fairly independently at their level, at the things that's appropriate for their level, then they may get like a 0 or a 1 on this rubric because their placement, based on their appropriate placement, they're able to do these things without the additional adult support. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is how I would argue this. So, and that's actually a great point, because I have been in meetings where teams have gotten a little bit confused on this first one, thinking that it's general education, and
Right.
it is based off of their appropriate LRE.
Right, because the purpose of this rubric is determining, do they need that additional adult? They're
Correct.
looking at based upon where they are in the day and their placement.
So if a student, a
Yeah,
lab,
because Allison,
Mhm.
I also, because if you're deciding based on the general ed classroom, maybe their least restricted environment would be more time in the sped classroom, not necessarily a para.
Right,
So I think it's key,
Good
like
point.
Hayden's saying, it's least restricted environment, because if you don't base it on that, then every kid in our not every, a lot of our kids going into general ed are going to need a para. And
Right.
actually what they need is more time in sped. So, you
Right.
have to look at that.
They could go either way on that. Okay, so whatever is their appropriate placement. Okay, that makes sense.
so yeah, this next section here, participate in group instruction level. They might require some supplemental strategies, again, with their appropriate LRE accommodations or additional supports. And they might require reminders to stay on task, follow directions, and to remain engaged in learning. And then the second level here is that you're starting to see more of that struggle. They might participate in whole class and small group instruction level, but they require that academic assistance for reinforcement. They're on task possibly 50% of the time. And there's a little bit of wiggle room in that one as well when you're completing this with IEP teams. The third criteria here would be they're not meeting their goals or objectives despite the maximum level of support. So in this situation, I would argue they have the special education teacher and possibly a para in the room, and they're getting that maximum level of support, close adult proximity, and they're still struggling towards meeting those goals and objectives academically. And then cannot participate in large or small group class instruction, constant verbal and physical prompting to stay on task. These are the most, I would say, profoundly students that need adult support. They regularly require that one-to-one instructional strategy in the classroom, and low to no work production and or participation. So this, to me, would probably represent some of those concepts, possibly essentials level students. Now, it's not limited to, but typically that's what we see with this fourth criteria.
And Hayden, when you guys are going through each of these categories, these discussions are separate, right? So like on a health and personal care, a student may have like the 0, that lowest level, like they don't need any support in that area. But in behavior, they might be at that 3rd level down. They might need a lot of behavior support. It's very individualized based upon each area. Those are separate points of discussion for every student, correct? It's not like, well, there's now this is every area is discussed.
So, you might have 2 or 3 domains where the student is at a 0 score.
Mm-hmm.
And just to reiterate, the score doesn't have an impact on whether or not they get a para. And we'll get into that a little bit more here later. But so they might say for behavior and instruction, they have a 3 and possibly a 4 for behavior and instruction. So the other domains, I'm just going to go back here. So for health and personal care, inclusion, independent social functioning, and prompting, they might be at a 0 or possibly a 1 to answer your question.
Okay. And you guys you're using this. So I know you're going to talk about the number part later. It's the description, those areas of description that are the discussion points to guide your discussion with the team. Like what best describes. And if you've got a student that you're like, okay, they look sort of like a 4, but they don't meet all that criteria. Do they have to meet every single checkbox? Or is it like, this is what best paints the picture? Or how do you handle that?
What I have done in meetings, and maybe Andrea can speak to this as well. If part of this in number 4, say for instruction, applies to the student and the team feels like it's closer to number 4 than number 3, then the team would base their decision off the data they currently have, but it does not have to be every single aspect.
Okay. So it's the best description of the data you have and the picture of the student at that time. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just, this is the guidance document as to where they're performing. Okay. Thank you.
Andrea, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
I was going to add, if we can't reach a conclusion, like say the school team stuck on a score of 3 and parents are dead set on a score of 4, like we can average it out to 3.5 if they're meeting, all 3 like of the scores in the 3rd domain, and then for the 4th score they only have 2. Like if we can't reach a compromise, we can always meet in the middle.
Because you're not beholden to like, this is their number or whatever. It's the guidance document and trying to best describe the student. And then that number is what you guys will discuss, how you use that number later, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And a lot of times, if it's very specific like that, we'll circle the domains that are applicable to the student.
Okay, that makes sense.
So moving on, the next one is inclusion, independence, social functioning. Again, we have this bottom criteria here. Fully participates independently and integrated in all educational activities. Basically, this student, they're able to navigate the campus on their own. They know their schedules, they know their routines, they can independently transition. They socialize well with peers and seek out their friends. For the most part, they're able to handle the school day and the school setting with minimal issues. And then the next criteria here, they may require some supplemental strategies and accommodations to be mainstreamed. They might require redirection to participate in some of the non-academic classroom and school activities. They can still find the classroom and move around the campus independently. They might require visual or verbal reminders. They might have a little bit of issues seeking out friends, but would engage if they are in a group, and for the most part, socialize well with peers.
I'm looking at these descriptions, thinking about, the students that I've worked with in the past and students that I know that you might think, oh, well, this is based upon like, there's no way your moderately disabled students would ever be able to hear. There are students that I know that are in like your essentials level classrooms, or those kids with moderate disabilities who still really can navigate the school fairly independently. They've got such maybe academic and or health needs that require a certain placement or require certain support, but can still navigate the class and the school okay, and can still engage somewhat socially. I think sometimes, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on this, that teams or parents can get stuck on, well, the student's in this placement, so there's no way they're functioning at this level, but it's really separating each of these domains into like, they are separate areas of where the student's performing, and kids have those splinter skills, right?
100% agree. And to the point that we made earlier, if you have a student who's struggling in the classroom academically and struggling with behavior, I have personally seen this section right here, the inclusion, independence, and social functioning, they're at a 0 or a 1. For the most part, they can handle the school setting as far as social functioning and inclusion and independently navigating the campus. But when they get into the classroom, they're struggling. And so you might see them at a 2 or a 3, or we have to make, you might have some team members that see them at a 4. Mm-hmm. And so, to Andrea's point, we might have to find kind of that common ground and compromise as far as where they fit best. And then with behavior as well. So it's not uncommon to see a student have possibly a 2 or a 3 in 1 or 2 areas, and then a 0 or 1 in 2 or 3 of the other areas as well.
Thank you. Hey, Hayden, we have, if you guys don't mind, and this could go to any of you, and I would love to provide my input just in general on my background, and then see what you guys think too. There's a question in the Q&A that, let's say a child scores the highest on this rubric, and they currently have like 1-to-1 pair support, and they've got that max level of support, and they're still not seeing results. They've got a BIP in place too. Is this enough data to support a child moving to a shortened school day, like a half day? I will say, in my opinion, it would depend on what other data you have. I think this alone would be a definite no. And I know that the State Department would agree. You would need to really look at that behavioral data in terms of what is on the BIP and what data they have there. But you guys jump in on if you've seen that, or what other input you all might have.
I agree. I wouldn't solely base shortening a school day using the pair rubric. The team needs to be tracking that data, especially, the goals on the BIP, to make sure that we're addressing those, and also making sure that we have every possible support in place to help that student be successful in the school setting.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, when it comes to shortening a student's school day, the data is going to be very important.
I think this rubric certainly gives helpful information in making decisions for a para. And if they've already got one, continues to support the need of one. But as far as I understand it from you all, that you're not using this to make decisions on other things. You may see, oh gosh, they're needing significant help in many of these areas, or significant enough in one that they require a lot of para support. So it justifies the continued adult support. It may also, by looking at it, paint a picture of like, oh gosh, we've got more work to do in this area. Let's dive deeper in whatever. But this wouldn't be really data to make other decisions, right? And I don't know, maybe you guys are using it that way, but I think it would paint a picture of what you could look at deeper. But I didn't know if you were using it as data.
No.
Okay.
No, your BIP would guide you. Does the BIP goals need to change? Do you need to do another FBA? Is that changing? I don't know. Some districts may not have behavior analysts and registered behavior techs and all that are specialized in that. But getting other specialists involved, sometimes their behaviors are not because of it, maybe because the instruction, maybe someone needs to go in to help the SPED teacher. I think observations, going in and observing, having the school site go in there and observe, or even having the administrator go in and observe and see what's going on in the environment that teacher may not be able to see because she's the one focusing on that behavior, or the outliers, what exactly is going on. But I think what's extremely important is the data. So keeping track of like Andrea said, when is this occurring? Is there something we can change? So that is going to be leading your discussion on shortened days. I would definitely not use this rubric for that.
Okay, thank you. Also, Rob, I'm so sorry. I got a message that at least one person's chat is disabled. Can we make sure the chat's up so that and reshare the PDFs? I don't know if other people have gotten them or if it's just people who've joined later. If we can reshare the PowerPoint and the link rubric, if you don't mind.
Sure, I'll do that.
Thank you. Okay, thank you guys. Sorry, Hayden. I know I keep
No worries. Absolutely. Glad to clarify any points on the para rubric. So getting back to this, inclusion, independent, and social functioning, we've got this second criteria here. So we're going to see a little bit more issue as far as additional adult support services and accommodations might be needed to participate in extracurricular and non-academic activities. And I want to point out that, there have been questions about extracurricular and non-academic activities outside of the school day, where we have used this rubric, to help teams make a determination on, if a para is needed. So if you have like a club, we have several clubs here at Jenks. And so, this has come up for students that have para support during the day, but then maybe need para support at that club. And so we've used this to try and address those issues as well. And then they might possibly need that redirection or monitoring specific strategies between activities, such as a visual schedule, front loading, so on and so forth. And then the third criteria, they're not meeting their IEP goals as far as this inclusion, independent, and social functioning piece. They're really not participating with staff in close proximity. We're not seeing a whole lot of success with the curricular or environmental adaptations, accommodations, so on and so forth. Supervision to participate in any non-academic classroom or school activities, direct supervision going to and from class, so that almost maximal adult support just to go from one class to another. And then, of course, the highest criteria on this piece, that constant direct supervision, always has to have essentially that one-to-one frequent physical prompts to participate, going to and from class and socializing and transitioning. So the next domain, I believe this is the last one, is the prompting. And so how many, essentially how many times is the para having to help and or remind or demonstrate to the student what they should be doing? And so obviously 0, no prompts. That first criteria, visual cues and or verbal reminders. So somewhat minimal. Modeling at that next level. So they might need to see, okay, this is how we're supposed to operate in this classroom, or this is how we're supposed to work on this assignment, so on and so forth. And then partial physical prompting. And then lastly is physical and or a combination of all of the above.
And Hayden, that's just in terms of like just overall. Overall, does the student respond to visual cues and verbal reminders? And that's typically what they would respond to. Then they would, that would be the description for them. Okay. Okay. And then I believe, okay, I think you're about to talk about it. Someone just asked about the score. You guys are not using these scores to determine a para or not. It's the discussion and the visual of the rubric, right? Like we see they need all this support in health and personal care and behavior that there's no way a teacher teaching a classroom could provide on their own. They would need additional support. The score doesn't necessarily equate to assigning a para or level of that para support, right?
That's correct. And Andrea, I think, is going to talk about this section right here. And then she linked the para rubric example, or actually, this is the para rubric example. This is actually a completed one.
Okay.
And I'm going to let Andrea kind of take over here. And then when you're ready for that, just let me know, Andrea.
Okay, thank you. So for scoring the para rubric, at the end of each column, there's a score. So you'll document the score for each of those domains. So you'll have 5 scores. You'll score the total and then divide by 5, since there's the 5 domains. And then that is that student's para need score. And again, we do these para rubrics throughout the year because support can change. And so the score is never just, that student score for the entire year and that's it. The score we use is mainly for staffing purposes. The score doesn't mean like if you have a score of 3.5, that equals a part-time para, or if you have a score of like 4.8, that means you get a one-on-one para. It's not like that at all. The scores don't really mean anything in terms of actually saying yes or no to para support. The score is simply what we use to provide equity for staffing purposes. Like Dr. Baker said, we have students that transition from site to site and even from building to building within the sites. And we want to make sure that support is equitable and it stays with that student because that's what the team has determined the student needs in order to be successful in that educational environment. So the scores are just strictly for us to quantify data for staffing determinations.
So you guys are using that when you're when planning for the next school year, of like this school has this level of para need, instead of saying historically, like I have known that, it's like, okay, this school is screaming the loudest that they need the help, but really, no, this is the level of para need. We have the data. It's this many students with this level of support. So that helps provide comparative information, right, between the school sites.
Correct. And we've even looked at it, during the school year, because we all know that, you have move-in students, you have move-out students. Mm-hmm. The para support can vary. If a site is stretched really thin, and like we can't keep up, we need some extra support, we'll go back to the para rubrics and look and say, oh my gosh, yes, look at the staffing data, we need to add a position to that site. So we also look at it, during the school year as well.
Okay. So when you're in a
term-
meeting, oh, sorry, Andrea, keep going.
In terms of like the rubric language and, the chart format, that's just simply a guide that serves as discussion points. And it's also a great visual representation for parents and the school teams to see really those areas of needs for that student.
Okay. Because I can imagine, like, you might have, when looking at the behavior one that Hayden went over, if a student's at like a level 3 or 4, meaning like they have a very specific BIP, not all BIPs require that one-to-one support, but if it is so specific that it requires that much consistent data in terms of whatever their goals are, then I could see maybe a student with a really high behavioral need may need like a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2 para, but might not have any other needs in the other areas. So their score, right, would be technically low overall, but they still may need a 1-to-1 para based upon that discussion. So do you guys, when you're showing this to parents, are you like, hey, this score, do you explain all this? This score is just for us, no school. Because I'm sure they see numbers and they're like, my kid needs a 4 here because that means they get a para, right? So you guys explain that to them, or what does that look like in that conversation?
We explain to them, just like we said, that the numbers are strictly for the district to quantify that data, and making sure those staffing determinations are equitable. And it's just a guide. We're really looking at the information within each of those domains and associated with that particular score. I was in a meeting recently and parents strongly felt that the student was at a 4, school team felt that they were at a 3, and we just agreed to disagree at that point. And I think we ended up giving like a score of a 3.5 as a compromise.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really just, it serves as a guiding point.
Right.
And like you said, behavior is a perfect example. You might have the student's behavior scored at a 4, but yet when it comes to medical, it can be a 0. That doesn't mean that the para doesn't qualify for support based on a low score.
Right. Okay. Because that's the discussion point, right? It's the guide for the discussion. And then the number serves a separate purpose for you guys. Since I know that there are some parents on here, and I see some names I recognize on the attendee list. There are some directors too. In terms of, I think this is all helpful for parents to hear too, if there are other districts that might start using something like this, that it is a discussion to help guide the team to show the need. But if there are directors or, school leadership team members on here that would like to understand better, because I know we don't have time for you guys to show the whole formula and all of that, because that's really an internal HR type thing, right? If someone wanted to reach out to you guys to better understand how you use those numbers for staffing, are you willing for them to reach out?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. At the end, maybe you guys can give your contact information if you're okay with people reaching out as to how what that actually looks like when you're using the numbers to determine staffing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hayden, do you want to bring up that example of the pair rubric? Okay, so here's an example of a student. As you can see, there's the 5 domains. So you have your health and personal care, behavior, instruction, your social functioning and independence, and then the level of prompting that the student requires. And again, I think the question came up earlier of like, are you looking at the student when they're just in the general education environment? It's within their least restrictive environment. So whatever that looks like for that student. And as you can see, we circled, the areas that were applicable to that student. So like I'm looking at inclusion, independence, social functioning. The first one wasn't applicable to that student, but the next 5 were. So that just serves as a great visual reminder, like, hey, all of these aren't necessarily true for that student, but this is where the team feels like that score, is a majority, and that's the most appropriate score for that student. So then at the bottom, the numbers are added up for each column. And then, like I said, you divide by 5, and that's simply for staffing purposes. So we've added a note section at the bottom. And that's really to help the next team and also document like where the student is currently needing support, if applicable. So this student, they determine needs 1-to-1 adult support across all school settings throughout the school day, and then 2-to-1 when it comes to toileting. So that's where you can make those
questions, Andrea.
Yes.
I like this. So, but you're not going to put on the student's IEP, which I see that you're going to show us some pair common language here. You're not going to put, they have a 3.8 score. So that means this, like you wouldn't even put that on the student's IEP because again, that score is just internal data for staffing. It's not really have a meaning for the student. But this, I like the visual of this actual rubric, how you can see that like the score, the higher this or the further up on the form that they are, the score, really the more independent the student is in those areas. So I could see how that makes a really good visual that if you've got, say, randomly a parent's like, my student needs a para, and you go through this rubric and you see actually the student's quite independent in many areas. Maybe a para isn't the answer. Maybe there's some sort of accommodation the student might need that isn't another adult. There's some other support. Or like in this case, you're going through and you're seeing like, oh, wow, a lot of these areas are actually further down here. They have a lot of needs in many areas. Has that been helpful when you're having meetings? Either way, where the team is feeling like there's a lot of support needed, or that it's just a parent request and the team doesn't quite see the need, the school team members, has the visual part of this through the discussion been helpful in those meetings?
Absolutely. And like we said earlier, a para is restrictive. So we want to make sure that we've exhausted all other options before coming and completing the pair rubric, because we want to provide the student with the least restrictive environment. And the note section is more of like a conclusion. So after reviewing the pair rubric with the parents, what does the team feel like pair support is needed? Like, what does that look like? So I think later on, or it might be the next slide, we have a document to create that common language, because we were noticing that it would be, one site would document it in the objective statement and another site would put it in the accommodations. And sometimes we would find it in the supplementary aids and services, and it was just everywhere. So we have, Hayden put it up there. We have what we call para common language to help mainstream that communication, so sites are fully aware. And I don't know if it's small for you all, but can you make it bigger, Hayden? Is that possible? That's good. Thank you. So when we're looking at the common language, we're considering the continuum of support. We're looking at, what environments does the student need support? And then we're describing the frequency that they need that support. And when we consider those 3 factors, we have some options for teams to consider. And this goes in conjunction with the pair rubric. So are we looking at, adult assistance in addition to the classroom teacher? Can that student share pair support with another student? Do they need, their own paraprofessional, so a one-on-one para or adult? And we've really tried to have teams specify as much as possible what that looks like, even in different settings. So like, we have a student that I'm thinking of that has a 1 to 2 paraprofessional when in the general education classroom and in the special education setting. But during transitions and recess, they might need a 1-to-1 paraprofessional. So it's not that it's just, a blanket statement of what that support looks like. It's very specific for each environment.
And you guys are using the 1 to 2, like 1 para to 2 students, right? So like you're meaning that student is okay to have this adult that's also supporting another student, because one-to-one is so restrictive. They have to just be glued to that student's shoulder. So that makes sense that they might need that level in certain situations, but from a lot of students, it may not be across the whole day. Okay.
Correct. Or, a certain special might be a trigger for a student. Like, let's say, for example, music, they might need more specific para support during that special, so that team could spell that out in the IEP. And also, it's great information for the next receiving site, or if that student were to move, I know I would want to know that information as much as possible.
Thank
To
you.
ensure the student's success. And then the frequency is also a consideration for IEP teams. So is it throughout the entire day? Does the student need para support? Is it just during lunch, specials, recess, those unstructured times? Is it just in the morning, afternoon? Looking at the frequency to, again, help teams support that student as best as possible. And there's a few examples below of, what that can look like. And these examples are just to help guide teams into making the most appropriate determination for the para language. And again, we're just trying to get our IEPs consistently documenting that para report. So that para support. So that's why we created the para common language document.
I like how this builds in like a structure and a framework for in terms of how and where to document things, but it still is very individualized, which is what, you're supposed to be doing. It's not like, oh, they're a student in self-contained class, this is the support they get. It's just the structure and the framework to help teams and you guys internally, and it guides them on what to do, but still is very much focused on how to individualize what each student needs.
Yeah. So let's say a student, the team determines needs para support. Hayden, I'm looking at the next slide for how and where to document the needs. So on the objective statement, we asked teams to list the continuum, the environment, and the frequency. And again, those are on the para common language document that you all just saw. And we also asked teams to put it on the accommodations, and you can mark other. There's like 3 other options that you can use. And we asked for teams to document on the accommodations. So when you do an IEP at a glance, it populates to the IEP at a glance. At the beginning of the school year, a lot of teachers request the IEP at a glance versus, a 20-page document of the student's IEP. And those accommodations show up so that teacher can instantly see, oh, this student needs para support and music, lunch, recess. So that's really helpful. So the objective statement, accommodations, and then also in the supplementary aids and services. And I know it's redundant and it's a lot, but just making sure that it's being documented and teams are consistent in providing that support for that student. Okay. So student has qualified for para support. Now what? Like Dr. Baker said, our ultimate goal is to provide that student with the support that they need at the time and write goals to address those needs to help them become more independent. Because our ultimate goal is to front load that support with the end of hopefully reducing and fading that para support over time. So for example, if a student's current prompt level is partial physical, they could have a goal, and this is geared more toward a child in the early childhood program, pre-K, kindergarten, first grade. Giving those fading prompts, the student will increase their independence by managing school supplies when they arrive at school. So, putting up their backpack, taking their lunchbox out of their backpack and their drink, putting them in their cubby 3 out of 5 times. And obviously we want to provide any visuals or gestures and cueing that we can. A lot of students use visual schedules, like first this, then that. And it's just a visual reminder for them on what they need to do in order to achieve those goals. So again, our ultimate goal is to provide them with the independence and the skills that they need so we can reduce that para support over time. An example for a student that is having difficulty with transitioning, giving fading prompts, we want them to increase their independence by transitioning from one class to the next with no more than one verbal cue per transition. So again, just a simple reminder of, we're on our way to music. Show me how you can walk in line with your hands to your side and a quiet mouth, or something along those lines. And this could be the paraprofessional that's providing that. And eventually we would hope that after so many times, the student begins to demonstrate and exhibit these skills independently without having that prompt. For restrooming, given those fading prompts, the student will increase independence using the restroom without adult support 100% of the time, depending on, and again, the student's percentage can change. We all know that a student's not going to go from, they're not potty trained to 100% independence. These percentages can change, as well as the verbal and visual cues, the prompting. But again, we want to provide that support and as early on as we can and front load that with the end goal of being able to reduce or fade that para support over time.
Andrea, I'm seeing that on these, like you had mentioned, developmentally, they may be like early childhood goals, but it may be a student who's in high school too, who's got more of like a significant disability, this may still be their goals, or may end up being their goals as they've grown and matured and been taught more skills, executive or functional skills. So even if you're thinking about picturing, some of those students with more significant disabilities at the high school level, when you're trying to prepare them to potentially go to a sheltered workshop or something like that, right? Functional stuff like this would still be potentially appropriate in terms of fading out. I mean, you may not be able to fade out a para fully, but if you can fade out through parts of the day or in certain skills, that improves their chances of like post-secondary opportunities, right? If they don't have to have that person kind of glued to their shoulder, right? If the less support that they need, the more opportunities that they have post-schooling. And am I correct in that, in remembering that?
Absolutely, yes. And you can kind of see, if you're visioning that para rubric, you can see which column these goals would fit under. Mm-hmm. And so that's another good reminder for teams as well. Hey, this student scored a 4 in this category. Like, how can we increase their independence in this? And what skills do we need to address?
Perfect. Thank you. So I hope everybody was able to access the presentation and the that para rubric for others to download if other districts want to take it and use it and modify it. I think Dr. Baker had mentioned before that is totally fine and great. Just sharing resources. There have been questions throughout, of course. There's not any remaining in the Q&A or the chat right now. But this was wonderful. Thank you guys so much. Jennifer and Hayden and Andrea, do you guys have any closing thoughts or anything, or at least share your contact information too, in case other directors want to reach out?
Yes, we can share. I know it is a lot of information, and you other districts may want to just let it all soak in. And then as you look at the rubric, questions probably will come up. And so feel free to contact us and ask any questions. Take the rubric, use it, change it, whatever you want to do that best suits your schools.
Perfect. And then to reach out to you guys, it's first name dot last name at jinxps.org, right? So they could email
Yes.
Andrea King, Jennifer Baker, Hayden Halbrook.
Yes.
Perfect. And then we thank you guys so much. This is wonderful. Hopefully this helps parents understand, maybe either in this district or in others if they're using something similar, to make data-based decisions, or at least have a document that helps guide that discussion instead of just pressure from one party or another. So thank you guys. This was wonderful. I want to say thank you attendees for attending. And we do have our last Wisdom Wednesday of this school year on May 15th. And it's over oppositional defiant disorder. It's called You Can't Make Me. So we've got a psychologist joining that's going to talk about supports for students with ODD. And I think Rob put the link to register in our chat if you guys want to register for that next one. And thank you again to Dr. Baker, Hayden Halbrook, and Andrea King from Jinx today. This was wonderful. And thank you guys for joining. Appreciate you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Allison.